This is episode number 452 of the Health and Fitness Podcast with Dan Cruse. Big shout out to our show sponsors, as always, Smith Street Paleo, food delivered to your doorstep, takes all the hassle out of your daily food prep and delivers you healthy food that makes your life a lot better. Go and check them out, smithstreetpaleo.com. Welcome back to the show, folks, and we are joined by another guest who knows a lot more than I do. And, well, Tom, you had a lot more contact with today's guest.
Yeah, taught me everything I know, to be honest.
Taught you everything you know, so we've got someone that's super smart. Dan Cruse on the line from the UK. Dan, thanks a lot for taking the time to chat to us, mate.
No, pleasure, lads.
We're going to we might try and get a little bit geeky with you, but we're also going to ask you some very difficult questions that hopefully Tom's prepared, because he said when you were teaching him at uni, he often used to get you in trouble. No. Mate, give us a little bit background. What actually you do down there in the UK? You're head of strength conditioning basically at Southampton, so you talk us through it.
Yeah, so basically I work at Southampton University, so I kind of head up their sort of strength and conditioning division. So we have basically a kind of performance program which supports around about 30 kind of individual student athletes, and then some kind of teams off the back of that. And our aim really is just to support these guys while they're studying, really. It's very much trying to obviously kind of develop them as athletes while they're here, but also trying to get them through their kind of university degrees, help them kind of balance, studying kind of sport in life and developing them as people, really. So, I'm very lucky because I'm part of a multidisciplinary team. I kind of lead on the S&C, but we have a head physiotherapist. We have an athlete lifestyle support officer who kind of helps balance their sort of academic studies and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, kind of blessed to be doing what I'm doing, really. So
Dan, tell us, how did you get to? So you head up the program now. How did that start? Obviously, S&C is quite notoriously difficult to get into. Just tell us a bit about your route to it.
Yeah, so I kind of went a little bit of a different route, I guess, in that I kind of went. Came from more of a personal training background initially. So my undergraduate degree here at Solent was in kind of fitness and personal training. So my first role here was kind of, I guess working more kind of gen pop stuff, really. And I just basically got an opportunity through kind of James, who's the old high performance manager, to start kind of working with some of the athletes here, and it kind of rolled from there, really. And then since then I've kind of done, a master's degree, which was kind of more sports science based, and kind of gone down the UKSCA route. But yeah, I guess it's a bit, I think the field is, it's so competitive, and I think you need a bit of luck. I definitely think you need to focus on kind of working hard and showing people that you kind of have some attributes that can potentially allow you to grow into a real competent coach. But I think a lot of it is kind of down to luck, really, and right place, right time, and that's kind of what happened to me, really.
Were you interested in sport from a young age, mate? What was it that sort of in sports performance that interests you, to get to this point?
Yeah, certainly not. Well, both my parents were kind of PE teachers for 25, 30 years, so sport's always kind of been a massive part in our kind of household. So both myself and my brother played, a lot of sports when we were kind of younger, and it was always kind of a big emphasis for us kind of growing up. And I certainly think that's kind of something that I've noticed comes out of my own coaching, is very, very much kind of the educational aspect. And I think because we're, in an academic institution, we maybe place, probably a bit more importance on it, but it's trying to educate these guys, not only kind of what they're doing, but why they're doing it and how that's going to make them, better athletes. And that's something that I certainly think sort of comes out in the way that I kind of try and work.
Do you think that's you touched on something interesting there, Mike, like educating people not only what they're doing, but why they're doing it. It's quite a holistic process, really, isn't it? Do you think that's an issue that we're facing these days? Like, people generally know that they should get better and that they can do certain things to perform better in sport and in life, but they don't really understand the whats and the whys and all of that.
Yeah, certainly, and I think there's a lot of kind of follow the crowd sort of mentality, isn't there? Like, people see stuff online and think like, oh, that looks pretty good. Why don't I kind of try that? And I think it's very much, everything is kind of about context, and that's something that I've kind of, tried to make a real strong emphasis on, working with my guys, is getting them to really believe in the training program. Because I think that's one of the most important things is, I would rather have a subpar plan on paper and that the athlete, is willing to run through brick walls for that plan because they know that, that's going to help make them better, rather than you have a perfect plan on paper, but the athlete doesn't really buy into, what you're kind of doing. So
yeah, exactly.
I think that's very important.
And how do you're in quite a nice position where you get to, an athlete comes on year one and you're going to work with them for another 2, possibly 3 years. Do you think about that when you first meet them, that, okay, this is going to be my athlete for 3 years, so we kind of need to make sure that they get what we're doing? Or do you just think quite short term, or do you take multi-approach to it?
The first year for me, really, I guess, if I know that I'm going to work with that individual for kind of 3 years, I think my first protocol really is about getting to understand them as a person, and kind of where they sort of come from, and ultimately what makes them sort of tick as an athlete, and trying to identify what their strengths are very early on, because I think, building upon those is probably going to be one of the most important things. Like, what is it that's got them to this level? Because I think sometimes people maybe focus a little bit too much on kind of what their weaknesses are, and maybe take them away from what's kind of got them onto this program. So
yeah. So what sort of level are they, mate? Do they all have to be national, or? Yeah,
so national at least, but most are on some sort of international pathway. So
wow.
I bet they're probably at the age where it's kind of junior, maybe progressing into sort of senior level. So but we work with kind of all manner of sports. So it's, for us as practitioners, it's kind of it's very exciting, but it's kind of very challenging.
How many sports are you programming for?
So for me, I probably work with, I would say, about probably 13 or 14 individuals, and I would say very rarely are 2 of those the same sport. So
wow,
yeah, you're probably looking at around 11 or 12 sports. Yeah.
So how does it work, mate? Obviously, a lot of the principles in every sport, we're dealing with the human body, and you've obviously got a very good understanding for how the human body works, but it obviously works different in all of those different 12 sports or 13 sports that you might be dealing with. So what are some of the fundamentals that you sort of approach with people that is the same, no matter if people are listening who are a top sports person or they're just weekend warrior or rank amateur, as lots of our listeners are rank amateurs. Are we allowed to say that? What are the sort of fundamentals that we should be thinking about?
Well, for me, like, the way that I like to explain it is kind of almost like an 80-20 rule. So 80% of my kind of programs probably look quite similar. Right. And then the other 20% is geared more towards the kind of specifics of each sport.
Wow.
And I think that allows, because one of the things I think, in terms of his programming is, consistency is very important. So I think that 80% is normally for me kind of made up of, what sort of movements kind of transfer across sports. So my opinion of that would be kind of through the lower body would be getting some kind of good knee and hip dominant work. I think some kind of like locomotion work is important. So if they're a kind of sprint based athlete, making sure that you're kind of going through some running drills, that they're kind of sprinting year round, they're kind of getting exposure to that sort of stress. Upper body wise, you're looking at kind of vertical and horizontal kind of pulling and pushing.
Yeah.
So making sure that's kind of in there. And then some kind of accessory work, which will, I think be dependent on the sport, but also kind of their injury history as well. So what sort of things have they kind of had, issues have they had going on previously, and kind of what are the sort of things that you're going to put in there that's going to hopefully allow them to kind of be more robust, I guess.
I think that's something awesome, and I think, I don't know what you think about that, Tom, but like all the time we see people come from different sports and they think the application is totally different, and mate, that 80-20 rule that you've used there is like, it makes so much sense. Like, and I kind of wanted you to say that as an answer, to be honest, but I'm like, we're all in the same body, aren't we? And everyone thinks, because I'm a runner I should do this, and I mean CrossFit's the worst. We said before we'd bash CrossFit, but we probably shouldn't. No, we can do it. But isn't it like that the whole time? People are thinking that it should be just so different.
Yeah, and I think it ties in with people thinking they need constantly different things. Like the idea of CrossFit being constantly varied is a great one, but in terms of like a raw program that's going to get results, like you say, a lot of it looks the same. And I remember one of the last lectures that you actually delivered with us, Dan, you were saying you should be able to write a program and I should be able to know who's written it. And I think that's really good, because a lot of coaches try and constantly be varied with their stuff to not like get the athlete bored. And you need to mix up a few variants of exercises, but at the end of the day, it's the consistency of the program that's going to work. Yeah. How do you fit that in with your athletes, mate? Do you use quite a lot of periodization? Do you tell them, suck it up, this is what's going to work? Like, what's the score, do you find?
I think it probably comes back to kind of getting to know your athlete. Yeah, so I think one of the things that's kind of helped me, I guess, over the last like 6 months, I would say, is having those kind of like, I guess, fundamental movements, that kind of 80% sort of rule, having those in kind of my program. So then I'm much more able to kind of, I guess, vary kind of exercises week to week and sub things in and out, but I'm always kind of working on those, specific movements. So I think that's something that's allowed probably me to be a little bit more consistent. And looking at my programs, you can kind of then see, okay, he's got his knee dominant and he's got his hip dominant. Everything's kind of a little bit more sequential.
Just give us some example of knee dominant and hip dominant, just for the listeners listening in who's not sure on that. Give us some examples there.
Yeah, so I think you're looking at kind of, I guess, bilateral or kind of two-legged squat patterns for your knee dominant. So that could be, a goblet squat, a front squat, a back squat, depending on, and this will always kind of be dependent on, I guess, mainly kind of your anatomically, how you're kind of structured, and also your kind of injury history, depending on what kind of, I guess, suits you better. And then hip dominant wise, you're looking at, I'm a big fan of RDL, so kind of partial deadlifts. So I don't do a huge amount of kind of bilateral deadlifting from the floor anymore.
Why not, mate?
Reason being, I just think there's more that can go wrong. So I really like kind of heavy kind of RDLs as an alternative to that, I guess. And then you've got some kind of, Nordic variations, some kind of isometric, glute ham kind of raises, that sort of stuff. I kind of try and do a little bit of that as well.
Sounds pretty similar to our S&C endurance class, actually. Yeah.
I wonder if you actually pay Dan for writing your endurance class that you teach. But is that again something, mate? Obviously, again, to go back, you're working with some quite high level athletes, but isn't that an approach that actually the general population could, but don't actually take in their training as well? Like if it's good enough for a top level athlete, then sure, it's good enough for the general population.
Yeah, certainly. I think probably one of the things that I guess Gen Pop people maybe struggle to get their head around is like just the variation kind of idea, is that they just think that they have to change things every week in order to kind of see some sort of long-term adaptation. So I think and ultimately sometimes consistency can be a little bit boring for some guys, can't it? So it's probably working out what sort of person you've got in front of you and how well they're kind of going to respond to that balance between consistency and then chucking in some kind of variety when you need to. I'm working with a guy this year who he's a fast bowler, a cricket guy, so he and he's a seriously strong boy, but he one of the feedbacks he had from last year was he felt like he almost had too much variation in his programming. Right. So he was kind of working with another coach, and he felt like he'd only start to get a movement, or he'd feel like he'd get strong over a couple of weeks and then it would change. So I think in that scenario, you maybe give someone like that a little bit more consistency than you would maybe someone that does after 2 or 3 weeks the same movement. They're just getting a bit bored, and you maybe need to change it up. And that's not going away from your principles. For example, if I'm using a squatting variation, I might just tweak it slightly. They're still going to squat, but they're just going to do something a little bit different, even from a mental perspective. That just keeps him a little bit more kind of engaged with the session, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's something that's super important. I mean, in our class program here, that's what we'll make people squat at least once or twice a week, but we'll try and vary that squat up, be it, like you mentioned there, a goblet squat, and next week there's box squats. Today there's just a regular back squat. So just trying to keep that variation whilst keeping the movement pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. Mate, I want to chat to you about one guy you've worked with now 2 years. This is just from a selfish point of view for our endurance guys.
That's fine, mate. I'm always happy to talk about the main man.
Yeah. So, yeah, you know who I'm talking about, Mr. Mo, who has done incredibly well over the past 2 years, certainly since I've known him, and just keeps rising and rising. Tell us a bit about him, what he does, when you started working with him, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Cool. So Mo is he's a distance runner. So primarily, I would sort of say 3 and 5K. But he has kind of done more sort of 10K races on the track over the last sort of few months. Now he's kind of an interesting one because he is doing more stuff on the track, or he has done over the last couple of years, but he really has had most of his success, prior to this in kind of cross-country meets and on the road. So he won bronze at the European Under-20 cross-country, and he's had kind of a few sort of senior vests for GB, so he's competed up in Edinburgh at quite a sort of big kind of cross-country meet. He was in the same team as Mo Farah, so yeah, for his age, he's had quite a bit of success from that perspective.
Yeah.
I've been working with him probably a little bit longer, really. So probably about 4 years now. So he basically came to us when he was at a local college. So he's studying at Itchen, which is one of our kind of partner colleges, and we started kind of working with him, getting him in once a week, just kind of exposing him to a little bit of kind of I guess structured S&Cs. He hadn't had any of that previously. And now he's kind of transitioned into being sort of an undergraduate student with us. So he's on our program. So I sort of see him at this point probably twice a week, each week, and kind of work, quite closely with the other guys in the team to try and help sort of manage his loading, which is quite a challenge. So.
Yeah. So how closely? So you see him twice a week. How closely do you work with his? His run coach? I don't know, has he only got one run coach still, or is he under a few? Like, what does that take to make sure you're all gelling as a team to get the best results for him?
Yeah, so he works with Pete Haynes, who's a kind of local coach at Southampton, so he's still working under him mainly. And me and Pete will normally meet kind of once every sort of 4 to 5 weeks, just to kind of have a sit down, mainly go kind of through his race schedule. I think one of the challenges for him is his race schedule changes quite a bit. So especially kind of during the winter period, like he might throw a road race in like here and there, and that's maybe something that I kind of haven't planned for. So I try and make those conversations sort of face to face, or as much as possible, because I feel like certainly from a practitioner perspective, you kind of get more out of it. And then he will kind of. Pete will sort of sit down with Kelly as well to try and help sort of manage Mo through his kind of academic studies as well. And then, that's it really, I guess.
So, obviously he's doing a lot of running in his week. Some of it will be like the long, slow duration stuff, and some of it will be the high intensity. When a lot of runners come here and try and fit in CrossFit along with their running schedule, or fit in, some sort of weights on their own, what does a session typically look like with Mo? Like, you're working with someone who's the best of his category in the country. Tell us a little bit about how you plan for him, what he's doing. Is he leaving the sessions like dead? Has he got max strength work? What's it look like?
Yeah, not at all really, mate. He doesn't often leave sessions dead with me, to be fair. But
listen up, people.
One of the things that I sort of think for him, I think this is for any athlete, is my opinion of it is it's always kind of health before performance. So ultimately, I kind of see my job really is just giving him people talk about kind of the minimal effective dose. So what is the smallest amount that I can kind of give him from an S&C perspective that's going to allow him to run as much as possible? So I think his kind of input into how he kind of feels is pretty important to that. So we kind of have a wellness questionnaire and stuff like that we kind of get some sort of subjective feedback around how guys are feeling. But what I've kind of found with him, because he's sort of come to the country so he's originally from Ethiopia, but he's kind of come here from a young age. I've got to know him over a period of kind of years quite well, and I think asking him the right kind of questions around how he's feeling sort of pre-session is pretty valuable. So that will kind of give me a lot. But
sorry mate, to jump in, what would you ask him pre-session? Because I think sometimes what a coach asks is also what an individual could potentially ask themselves, so there could be a good learning here. Yeah,
it'll be kind of, I guess, the standard stuff around I'll often see him on a Wednesday when he's had a track session on a Tuesday, so it'll be a quick sort of question around how was the session last night, what sort of protocol did you do, RP wise out of 10, how tough was it, how did you kind of sleep last night, what is your kind of general level of soreness, how kind of sore are you, mainly through the lower body, and then kind of using that, and I like to use that along with a kind of warm up. So I try and have a real deep look at him in the warm up. Is he moving as I would normally expect him to? Right. And then marrying those two kind of, I guess those two bits of data up to kind of then make an informed decision about what I'm kind of going to do.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the things I think I've kind of noticed with programming is, don't get me wrong, having a plan is very important.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be very mindful about how you need to kind of tweak that, especially for someone like him. So, based on kind of how much he's kind of been doing and how he is kind of going through the session. So often, I might have, if we're doing a strength session, I might have 4 sets planned, and I'll cut it after 2,
right.
Because I'll just go I look at him and be like, yeah, he's not really kind of moving with the, I guess, fluidity and kind of and mainly intent that I would kind of want him to. So what's the point in doing those extra 2 sets?
Right.
Because ultimately that's not
going to make him run faster, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think from an S&C perspective, everything we do is very general in nature, isn't it? My kind of squat program or my program isn't going to make him a better runner. What's going to make him a better runner is running. So my job then is to make him as healthy and as robust as possible to allow him to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things where people fall down. So you use the example of, guys are doing really kind of heavy sort of running workloads, and then they're coming in trying to smash CrossFit.
Yeah.
And you just think how is that going to make you better when you're just emptying the tank further, and then you're going to try and recover and then go back and do another tough running session the next day or possibly later in the day. It just so yeah, I think it's kind of using the gym work as a tool mainly.
That's a good way of putting it.
For me it's understanding where I fall in the chain. Do you know what I mean? I think a lot of S&C guys have quite
ego.
There's a lot of egos around, and maybe they see themselves as more important than they actually are.
Yeah.
But if you look at where I am in the chain of importance, I'm pretty low down. Do you know what I mean? Especially when you compare what I do to his kind of technical coach.
Yeah. So mate, you said something then a little bit back. Minimal effective dose.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine a lot of people's ears have pricked up on that.
Yeah.
How can you work out what you're doing is the minimal effective dose?
Yeah, I mean that's quite a challenge, isn't it? And I think, I guess, my sort of opinion would be trying to sort of track different measures over kind of a monthly period and work out whether the person you've got in front of you is improving, because ultimately that's the kind of main thing, I guess, isn't it? It's giving them the least amount possible to ensure that they're kind of improving. So I think it's probably using that alongside their kind of feedback. So, you know, how they kind of feel the training program's going, whether they're doing too much or kind of too little, and kind of how that's influencing their kind of running, really.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing as well is, you know, from an S&C perspective, I think sometimes people get too bogged down in like the gym target. So it's like, oh, okay, so his back squat's gone up, so like he must be a better athlete. But you know, that's not what's happening, is it? Like, that's only a small part of.
He's just got better at squatting. So what
exactly? So
from what you see from sort of more recreational runners, what is S&C going to give them? Like, how is it going to help them? Because, you know, you're coming in, you're squatting, you might be getting stronger, you might not be, but actually it doesn't really matter because it's whether your running's getting better. So what are the adaptations? Why should runners come in and lift?
Well, I think one of the most important things, I guess, is we know kind of from research that, you know, more often than not, stronger athletes get injured less. So that's kind of one of the most important things, I guess, is trying to build sort of tissue and joint resiliency. And I think the other thing you kind of look at and go, like, one of the things from an S&C perspective that I always try and think about is, you know, what else have they kind of got going on in their program, and what are they not getting? Right, what are you not getting from running? Okay, and those sorts of adaptations. Well, that then comes from your gym work. So trying to allow you to kind of, you know, produce more force, absorb more force. I think from a running perspective, like, one of the things that I would probably, I mean, you know, this would probably be anecdotally, I guess, and I haven't worked with a lot of kind of Gen Pop runners, but I would imagine there's not that many that do, you know, specific running based drills. So like, how much of that are you doing in, and that doesn't necessarily have to come from an S&C perspective, but are you doing that before you run? Because building kind of squat and, you know, deadlift strength is one thing, but it's then how are you able to apply that force in more of a kind of running specific manner? So are you doing sort of, you know, A-based drills and, you know, high knee skips and all that sort of stuff? Because we kind of also know from research that reactive strength, you know, how efficient your sort of stretch shortening cycle is, you know, that potentially can improve your running economy. So
so just for people on that, you're talking about when the foot hits the floor, how economical it is being put back up through the run cycle, essentially, so the recovery cycle of the foot. So you want a shorter contact time, correct?
Yeah, essentially. So if you can make that sort of contact time as short as possible, that's essentially going to benefit you, isn't it? So it's not only important for sprinting, but you think about how many strides you kind of do in a 5, 10, 10K race.
Exactly.
If you get someone more efficient on each kind of stride cycle, then adding that up over that number of strides is probably going to make someone, or potentially can make someone more efficient. So, I think from a running perspective, I guess that's one of the things, isn't it? Is people, you know, you maybe get runners that come in the gym and are maybe doing a lot of the general kind of base movements, but they maybe steer clear of more of the kind of plyos and kind of explosive work.
Yeah, why do you think that is, mate?
Sorry, mate?
Why do you think that is? I have an idea, but I want to hear what you think.
I think for a couple of reasons. I think one traditionally they're not very good at it. You know, it's that kind of like. It's that kind of, unfortunately, that's that kind of slow twitch.
But they're awesome at bench press, so.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, I think they almost, like, what we kind of find here a lot is, you know, they'll maybe do drills and they feel a bit silly because they'll like compare themselves to, like, we've had guys that have done it before that have, like, they're doing drills and they'll see someone maybe across the gym who's like a 400 meter runner or a sprinter, and obviously technically it looks very different. So I think that's one of the problems. You know, they maybe steer clear from it from that perspective. But I also think, like, people, you know, underestimate how much coaching needs to go into that kind of work. I think people just look at it and go, "Oh, it's just jumping." Do you know what I mean? So yeah, you know, it's that's kind of easy to coach versus maybe coaching a squat. So they maybe haven't just been taught like how to do it and how to do it properly. Is probably the thing, I guess. But
and also, do you find to coach the drills? They take a lot of rest, and they take, you know, you need to let the the body recover from it, and you don't feel that fatigued once doing it. It's more later on in the day or the next day that you get more neurological fatigue, right?
Yeah.
So people are coming in and they're saying, "Oh, do a few A skips and a few drop landings, and that's it." Like, come on, like I need to feel tired here. But actually, the rest, the rest between those drills to make sure that they're actually giving the body something beneficial is quite large, right? You're looking at sort of nearly 2 to 3 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's kind of the same. My opinion is if you're emptying the tank from a strength and power perspective, then the rest needs to reflect that. And I think that's what you'll kind of often find in those sorts of programs in the gym, and it's the same for people doing speed work. Is one of the biggest flaws is they just don't rest long enough.
Yeah.
So no matter if you feel, subjectively you feel ready to go again, but if your outputs aren't the same in the next set, then that's a problem, isn't it? Because the adaptations you're kind of striving to get are that, like, you're trying to hit fifth gear in the gym, aren't you, essentially? Yeah. And if you're not getting there, then that's a problem because you're training someone else. And I think, like you kind of touched on there, like maybe that's why, like, just thinking about it now, some runners are kind of attracted to CrossFit is because, they subjectively, they probably get that feeling of like, oh, I'm working hard, like, I'm doing lots of work and I'm getting not very much rest. So maybe they kind of, the feelings that they get maybe replicate what they're getting from their technical sessions, and then they look at that and go, okay, I'm feeling the same, so therefore I'm getting the same kind of adaptations, the same kind of work. But
yeah.
Let's jump into a little bit of CrossFit, mate. We obviously have a lot of listeners who love to play CrossFit. From your sort of more, I guess we could call it like a technical, scientific background, share, mate, and openly share some of your thoughts on CrossFit. What have you, like, you've probably seen, you've been in the industry a while. What have you seen over the last sort of 5 years of how it's developed and where it's got to, how it can help people? Just a general sort of few thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I probably slammed it quite a bit in the past, and I think it's probably like anything else, isn't it? Like, there will be some very, very good CrossFit coaches out there, but I just think from what I've seen, you kind of have there's a lot of really bad movement going on. Do you know what I mean? So
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I just can't get my head around how you can get, a 40-year-old Gen Pop person in the gym, never really lifted before, like very sedentary, and teach them how to deadlift in 5 minutes, and then go, right, you're doing as many reps as possible. You know what I mean? Like, that for me
such
just
a
doesn't.
Good summary.
it just doesn't stack up. And one of the things that there's an American S&C coach called Mike Boyle, who's pretty prominent in the field, and one of the best things that I heard him kind of describe CrossFit as is, they kind of sell it as this idea of planned randomization, and he's like, well, to me that's like an oxymoron, because workouts are either planned or they're random.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we all know, having worked, if you work with athletes or you're an athlete yourself, like, random training programs probably aren't going to get you to where you want to go.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So the idea that you can just come in and we'll just go, we'll just throw like 3 movements together, and we'll just do as many reps as possible, and like,
I believe they call that a triplet, mate.
Yeah, triplet, couplets, triplets.
AMRAP, that's what the kids say, isn't it, these days?
AMRAP.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, like, I mean, and also, like, one of the things that you kind of got to think is, don't get me wrong, like, it's important to train hard, isn't it? And like, you guys know, in the sports that you're kind of involved in, like, how important it is to kind of push yourself and stuff like that. But there's a kind of line where, if you're doing this kind of movement work, like, to me, the simple thing is if the movement stops looking how it should, then you're working on someone else. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So if you're squatting, when you're looking like a melting candlestick, you're just folding over, and you're trying to do as many reps as possible, like, that's probably a problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just can't, like, I can't accept, like, coaches that just look at that and think it's all right and just go, like, they're working hard, like, and I just think it's negligent, because your average person you get to the end of one of those workouts, right, and you'll feel amazing. because for them, they've probably trained harder than they maybe ever have.
Yeah.
So they get to the end, they're breathing really deeply, they're like drenched full of sweat, and they think, this is awesome, I'm training so hard, but they don't know any better. Do you know what I mean? They probably don't have video feedback of themselves doing these movements and what it actually looks like.
We've got plenty of pictures of them, and I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we see here. That's why we try and sort of control people as much as we can. Is that most people, and this comes back to a few of the things you said before as well. Most people's measure of fitness is and their progress is how hard they're working and how much they're covered in sweat. And CrossFit delivers that on every level. You're going to feel tomorrow terrible because you've done all of those deadlifts so badly. That's why you're going to feel stiff and terrible, and at the end of it, they're going to, and I mean, it's something massive as well. We get a lot of people come in the gym and is this CrossFit? And we're like, well, yes and no sort of thing, because not that we're embarrassed that we offer CrossFit, but we want to offer CrossFit in a way that's healthy and prolongs fitness and prolongs their health and well-being. But I think one of the things that comes down to is that exact point, that people's motivation and satisfaction, maybe we're measuring that in a strange way, right? Whereas a lot of what you do, like you say, you're not trying to smash Mo Farah every time he comes in, but you know that you can make him better. So maybe it's on a motivational level, isn't it?
Yeah, I quite like using kind of resistance-based circuits from a metabolic standpoint.
For sure,
and essentially that's kind of what CrossFit is, really, isn't it? But
absolutely.
I think what you've probably got to look at is what sort of movements you're picking. Do you know what I mean? I think you have to be very careful with that. So, for me, doing movements like, say, Olympic lifting and box jumps and things like that, they're kind of power production movements. So if you're doing them for even 10, 15 reps, that's a problem, because you're training muscular endurance. You're not training them to kind of improve power output. Yeah. After about 3 or 4 reps, they're done. So I think you can do CrossFit, or you can get a lot of those kind of subjective benefits that you're kind of chatting about. You can do that, and you can kind of get that, but give them movements that are a little bit simpler to execute. Things like just your standard movements like squats and kettlebell farmers walks and press ups and supine rows and stuff like that. Do that, because ultimately, when they hit however long you're going for, if you're doing 30 seconds on or whatever, when they get to the end, those movements are probably, the room for error is a little bit smaller, isn't it? You might get to the end and you might fail on a press up, but the chance of you getting injured on that versus the chance of you getting injured doing a snatch, do you know what I mean? They're kind of worlds apart. So I think that's the thing. I think that, and ultimately that's where it comes back to, the kind of, I guess, the quality of coaching and
accountability
and people,
of the coach.
People actually teaching. Do you know what I mean? You've got to teach these guys. You've got to actually coach them. You've got to get them moving better. That's kind of the thing. But
I think it's true. I think it's a great point, mate, on those sort of low skilled movements, low skill, low risk, and still high opportunity to get that feeling that they're after without sort of snapping them in half. And I think generally in CrossFit that's where we see probably it's not people are not treating it in the way that it should be treated. And funnily, our classes that are low skill classes are some of the most popular ones as well. So that answers Cardio Club on a Saturday gets most people in it, and we literally, it's all low skill movements. So that's also super interesting.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for me is it's using these things as a tool. It's kind of like Olympic lifting. I don't think you should be married to a tool, because that's ultimately something that you can use to kind of help it improve someone. But ultimately, in that scenario, I'm not trying to make any of my athletes weightlifters. You know what I mean? Ultimately, I think you need to ask people and have a serious conversation about is this going to make you any better as a runner, as a cyclist, as a triathlete, as a footballer? Is it going to make you any better at your sport? And I think if you had a serious conversation with a lot of people and you went through like, their kind of training loads and chatted to them about CrossFit, I think then you'd get a bit more of a kind of, I guess, the answer that you're kind of looking for. And I think that's the thing, is people just, they almost like, they start to use these things a little bit, I guess, too much and kind of hair and scare them, and then like wonder why they're not maybe improving in their actual kind of skills and sport that they're kind of trying to. So
overcomplicate.
I think we should do job swap. I think you should come here and do my job for a little while. I think it'd be really good. But mate, one thing that before we wrap up, we go for another few minutes. Earlier on, you said like 80% is quite general of what you're doing with athletes, and then these 12 or 13 different sports that you're working across. You then do 20% that's specific. What give us some examples of specific stuff that you do for people in their sport that that might be interesting for people to listen to.
So I think like for me it would be that kind of extra 20% would probably be geared towards like that individual from like I guess a kind of previous injury history perspective to start with. So I'd maybe give them some kind of drills which are going to help, I guess, keep them healthy, like kind of number one. And then number two, it'll probably be geared towards, like I was chatting about earlier, kind of maximising their strengths depending on kind of what sport they're in. So, for an example, I'm working with a boxer at the minute, so he's just had his first professional fight, so he's got his second one in a couple of weeks. But so for him, I would kind of focus that 20% on probably, injury reduction wise, it'd probably be a lot of work around the shoulder, so kind of shoulder stability work, and then high on the agenda will probably be kind of rate of force development, and then I think if I had. So he's doing a lot of kind of metabolic conditioning as part of his kind of technical training. If he wasn't doing as much of that, or he kind of had some weeks where, maybe he's not getting as much of that work, then I'd kind of chuck that in there as well. So I think, it's...
The answer's always probably, it depends, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a tough one, but like I was kind of saying before, I think you've always got to ask yourself the question, are you helping or hindering? So, like for me, I would like to do maybe a lot of that metabolic conditioning work with Jack because, I feel like I've got some good ideas and maybe some creative stuff that I could do with him that would be really good. But ultimately, for me to throw that in there with him now, while he's got such a high training load and he's like smashing out like loads of kind of circuits with his kind of like boxing coaches, for me to put that in there is probably negligent because it's kind of like, why am I putting that in there? I'm probably putting that in there for me rather than him. Do you know what I mean? Because ultimately I'm just adding in extra sessions. Like, he probably will get something out of them, but ultimately they're going to cause kind of probably a little bit more fatigue, and that risk kind of reward, I guess, balance is going to be thrown off. So.
But I think there's another good learning for a lot of the listeners there as well. Like, follow the program, but then take 20% of your time to something that's actually really specific for you as an individual, and if you're an office worker, then spend a little bit of time on things that are actually helping you get rid of all the problems that come with being an office worker and stuff. So I think that's sometimes the responsibility that people need to take, going back to the general population, people need to take a little bit of responsibility in their training, go to a class or go to a coach, but then take a little bit of their own time and be specific to themselves as you're doing with these athletes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good.
And I think ultimately it's like, and it's getting to like, if for general population people, it's getting to know your own body, isn't it? Like, and getting to know like how that kind of training is kind of making you feel, like day to day and week to week, and kind of working out like, what are the areas you kind of need to work on, I guess, in terms of weaknesses, but also like what are you good at, like. You know what I mean? What things are you good at, and how can you ultimately make those even better, like from a gym perspective? I think it's trying.
I think, and mate, that rounds back to what you said at the start as well. Like, a lot of people are focusing on what they're not good at, and they're trying to make that better as opposed to making the good things better. So it's cool. We sort of come full circle, mate. Before we let you go, and we do super appreciate your time, mate. And it's good to get you two geeks geeking it out a little bit there. I think that was nice. Some of the listeners will be like, "What the hell were they talking about?" But hopefully we'll get a lot more questions on the back of it, mate. We try and wrap up the shows by just asking you for sort of one piece of advice. You've obviously been exposed to a load of different things in the field of sports science, of physical training. If there's one piece of advice that you could wrap it up with, which I know it's not easy, but what would that one piece of advice be?
I'll probably give you three. I'll tell you what, I'll give you three.
Okay.
3 bullet points.
Geeks get through.
So, and this is kind of around, the things that I think are probably most important. I would say, number one, movement's always a priority over load and volume.
Yeah.
Okay. So get guys moving well first of all, and then you can load them. The second one would be like health before performance. So kind of like we were speaking about previously. No point in you like smashing big numbers in the gym if you're getting on the start line and you're not healthy.
Yeah.
So I think, from that perspective, if you're coaching people, it's reining in your own ego a little bit and kind of working out ultimately, like, you need to get guys on the start line first of all. So that would be the second one. And then the third one would be, it's not about you, it's about the athlete. And I think there's probably, a lot of coaches and a lot of people out there kind of trying to take credit for, good performances that their athletes have done and all that sort of stuff. And I think ultimately, like, you have to understand that you're part of you're just there to support the athlete.
Yeah.
Whatever they achieve, in their career, that's down to their own genetics. That's, you're ultimately there just to try and get out of their way, really, aren't you? It's kind of making sure that you're, not hindering them and,
awesome.
Kind of helping them to be the best they can, really. So.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, mate, we really appreciate you taking the time out to chat to us. Maybe Tom was saying in return for spending the time, he was going to send you an airfare to come out and visit us in Dubai. I don't know. You guys maybe sort that out.
He'll have to win a few races when he earns some money or something.
Well, mate, there's got to be some way to get it, but he's going to figure all of that out. But Dan, we really appreciate your time, mate, and
thanks very much, lads.
Congrats on what you've done, and thanks for sharing that 45 minutes of knowledge with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, cheers, Dan.
Thanks very much, lads. Have a cracking day, all right?
Awesome, mate. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
See you later.